There she is. Hi, Deepa.
Hi. Am I late? I was
No, no,
working.
you're not late. You're right on time.
Okay, great. How
Yeah.
lovely to see you.
Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Deepa's joining us from the US, and I will take a minute to introduce her, and then we will have a conversation. You're also welcome to, put in your questions, and I will take those questions at the end. So let me start with an introduction. Dr. Deepa Narayan is the author of Chup, Breaking the Silence About India's Women, which is a groundbreaking book based on hundreds of interviews with middle class and upper class women in India. It's a book that's been described as revolutionary, as a book that will hold up a mirror to yourself, as a perfectly unsettling read that patriarchal India deserves. I loved that review. Dr. Deepa is a TED speaker, and I highly, highly recommend that you watch her TED talk after this session, which is called The Seven Beliefs That Can Silence Women. She was a senior advisor at World Bank in Washington, D.C. She's written 17 books. She's the recipient of many awards, including being named as one of the 100 most influential global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine in the USA. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to have Deepa with us today to talk about her work, about the seven beliefs that she uncovered that culturally trained women to be invisible and to stay chup. Deepa has also founded Chup Circles, which are a series of workshops that are designed to help women uncover and transform these beliefs and reclaim their power and voice. So we are collaborating with Deepa and Chup Circles to bring this workshop to you starting the 4th of July. So I will also post a link where you can sign up for the workshop immediately after the live is over. And I would highly recommend that you join because I'm going to do the same as well. So, with that, welcome, Deepa. I have to admit that I'm a little bit in awe of you. So, if I sound nervous or anxious, please
Please
forgive
don't be. Please don't
um,
be. There's no reason.
but I'll dive right in.
Okay,
My first
great.
question is, why did you explore the question of a good woman? Why that question in particular?
It's a good question. It's This is after the Nirbhaya rape in about 2013. I was thinking about what can I do? What can I do to change this context? And as I thought about it, my strength is in my writing and in ideas. And as I thought about it, the question that kept coming to me as a psychologist, anthropologist, that part of the answer lies in the culture. And what is it in the culture that leads to such violence against women? And actually what happened was going down from the top, from the national level, coming down to what's the core idea? And the core idea that I came up with very quickly was this question about what does it mean to be a good woman? And what does it mean to be a good man? Because I don't think we can address the question of good woman without addressing the question of good man, because the two are interlocked. And
Yeah.
if one shifts, the other has to shift. And if the other doesn't shift, there's a dislocation, there's a disjointedness or disequilibrium. So that was it, is that if you go back to any religion or any society, the foundation of every society we say is a family. But what is it that rules within the family? It's the idea of creating good people. And we don't talk about good people, we talk about man and woman. It still is man
Yeah.
and woman. So thought about, okay, what does it mean in India to be a good woman today? And so when I started asking students, my first set of questions or interviews were at St. Stephen's College, because I was asked to come and give a talk on poverty. And I said, I'll come if I can interact with the students and ask these questions and explore gender issues. And I was so stunned by what young women and men were saying about themselves that, I mean, I was stunned, I was surprised, I was dismayed, and then I couldn't figure out what was happening. And as I thought and reflected on it, I thought there's something here. So then I went to another college and another college. So that's how it started. I hadn't intended to do research. I hadn't intended to spend 5 years on addressing this issue. But that's what actually happened, is that whether you're in the US or the UK or in Indonesia, if you scratch and keep scratching, the fundamental question that a society is based on is this notion of what's the ideal man, what's the ideal woman, what's the good woman, what's a good. In fact, in the West, if you go back to the story of Adam and Eve, It goes
Hmm.
back to, they broke a rule of
Yes.
how they were supposed to behave. So this
Yeah.
is sort of in the origin myths of every society. So what I thought was a simple question is actually a very foundational question of every society. That's why it took time.
And I also see that you chose to focus your work on middle class and upper class women, mostly educated, independent women. Why did you feel that that was necessary to focus on that?
I had actually spent my lifetime's work has been on understanding poverty. So I
Yes.
had spent 2 years before that asking very similar questions in rural areas about with mostly women, but then also men, for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier, that we really need to understand men's thinking on this as well. And when I started talking to middle class women, educated women, women who were at home as housewives, as well as women who were working, I realized that I wouldn't be believed if I mixed up what poor people were saying with what middle class people were saying, because people would once again say, "Oh, yet in Kai, this is their
Inside to
problem,
it.
not
Huh.
our problem."
Yes.
And the other shift I made was that initially I was also talking to women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the entire lifespan. And in the cities, also poor people. And that's when I dropped all that and decided to focus just on primarily on younger women, and also started going into schools to understand what children were thinking. Because every time I watched a TV show, women and men were saying, you should see our young women now, they're modern.
Yeah.
They are liberated. They don't have any problems. And so I realized if I wanted to be taken seriously, that I would really have to focus on a large sample of young women, educated women, not poor women, and living in the biggest metros in the country. So that's how the sampling emerged.
And what were the things that you uncovered? The beliefs that you spoke about. What were those? Could you tell us about some of the things that you uncovered while you were
Yeah.
talking to these women?
When you're doing research, it's difficult to make sense of everything because you're too
Yeah.
much too involved. Uh, I think my biggest the thing that surprised me the most was that I would go and talk to women like you, very smart, very articulate, seemingly very together, in cafes or places. And once after the initial conversation, what would start is sort of an unpacking of the issues when a little bit of trust was built up. So, for example, I'll never forget this one woman who, for about 10 minutes, lectured me, told me that I was a sexist, which I am. We'll come to that later. And she said, you shouldn't be talking about women. You should only be talking about human beings. And just
Mm-hmm.
the fact that I used the term woman meant that it was sexist. And it is, but you need to use some words. So then I asked her the question, which is, what are the three words that come to your mind immediately? And it's a good exercise for everyone to do and even respond and chat. What are the three words that come to you as a woman or as a man or your self-identified identity? First three words that come to your mind when you think of yourself as a woman or a man. And her three words was mother, sacrifice, and giving. And she didn't
Yeah.
see the contradiction in these. So we have to go below the surface,
Yeah.
below our political correctness, and tap into our deep beliefs, because only then can we change. So in a sense,
Yeah.
it's uncovering and dropping the pretense. But the other piece that's really important is to do this in a non-judgmental, compassionate way.
Yes. Thank you for
So it's
saying
not
that
about
because
judgment.
yes, I hear what you're saying, and I feel that about myself all the time. That I feel like it never ends. Like I keep uncovering one belief after the other, whether it is from childhood or from somewhere else, that where I feel like I'm conditioned and I'm not owning my power and I'm not speaking up. But what you said that we have to do it without shaming, without judgment, without compassion is, I think, what is
With
really
compassion,
important. Yeah,
with lots
yeah,
of compassion. I think we can
yeah.
only change if there's radical love for ourselves.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. Um, So could you take us through these 7 beliefs that you speak about? What are these 7 beliefs that keep women invisible and muted?
Can I speak just a little bit about what uh, pulls them together? Because I think it's
Yes.
really important to understand that. Uh, so when I was looking at my 18,000 pages of notes,
Hmm.
literally
Hmm.
18,000 pages of
Yeah.
notes, it's a lot. And so I was searching for a theme. What is it that ties it together that will help us unpack patriarchy or look at patriarchy in a new way? Because I feel that term is so overused that it stops conversation. It doesn't give us lever points in terms of what to act upon. And so the idea that came up for me was the idea that we're still training girls not to exist.
Hmm.
So we're training girls and women are not meant to exist. And so the entire cultural weight goes on minimizing that you have to keep alive to serve people with power, which is men, but you yourself don't need an independent existence because your job is to serve others. So everything in the culture is interlocked in a way that it does its best to create women, good women. And the definition of good woman is a woman who does not really exist or exists only for others.
Hmm.
And so that is really, really important to remember because only then will the small everyday behaviors, proverbs, rituals make sense. Because the entire culture is set up to ensure a woman does not exist or minimize her existence. And if we understand that, we have a completely different lens to look through. So it really is about becoming a cultural detective, which is what I call myself. And that
Yeah.
makes it fun and takes away the blame and shame and, yeah, shame. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We are who we are because we've been
Yeah.
trained to be this way. And I find
Yeah.
that very liberating because then you can get away from blame and you don't have to hide who you are or how you are and say, okay, how do I change? So if the idea is the fundamental idea is that women should not exist, the first thing you have to do away with is what? The body, right? Because if you exist, if you're not supposed to exist, you have to pretend that the body doesn't exist, right? So if the body
Yeah.
doesn't exist, very simply, why would you have sex education? If the body doesn't exist, there should be no rape. So if a girl is saying she's raped, she shouldn't be trusted. There are all
Hmm.
kinds of things, or how we dress, or whether we're supposed to be looking at others or not. Um, so first is the body and how the body is held. In fact, about I think 90% of women said that they've been in different ways that we've all learned how to shrink our presence, right?
Yes.
So women are taught not to take up space, again to minimize the existence, to contract. Men expand, right? Men sit with their legs spread out.
Hmm.
A woman is trained to sit with her legs really tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the minimizing. You have to remember the word
Yeah.
minimizing and everything. And hunch shoulders. Why do we have to
Yes.
hide our breasts? We talk to hunch our shoulders, etc. And yet, when we ask women, every woman knows the body posture of a confident woman, right?
Hmm.
Because this is instinctive. You know this, but you're actually
Hmm.
being trained to be a specialist in the opposite.
Yes. Yes.
So when you see this, it's ridiculous, and then you can start changing bit by bit in each behavior. So if you don't have a body and you're not supposed to exist, how can you have a voice? So it's a very
True.
logical thing, the progression of how to minimize your existence. And you can look at the book or listen to the TED Talks. I don't want to go through every habit, but another one is pleasing behavior.
Hmm.
And I think all these habits cut across cultures because
Yes.
every modern society is patriarchal, whether it's the US or Sweden. By the way, when I talk to Western countries, they assume that they're above it until I give examples. A very simple example is violence against women. Even in Sweden, 28% of women have experienced violence,
Yes, that's a
violation of
staggering
physical,
statistic for a society
right.
that's supposed to be progressive.
And yet, in the overall Human Development Index, they are number 8, right?
Hmm.
So these are universal. The manifestation or how it looks or which habit is more important or still there's a residue of it is different in each culture. Then I talk about denied sexuality. I talk about lack of women trusting other women, which is a very deliberate trained habit. It's not a dysfunction of women. It's not a genetic defect. Um, what else? Dependency
Yes.
and no individual identity or in duty, much more focus on duty rather than your own desire. So it all comes together to minimize women's independence and confidence and trust in themselves. Why? I mean, why is that functional for a society? It's functional in a society which still believes that women should not exist. But with
Yes.
education, we thought all this had changed because our beliefs have changed, right? So there's
And
a
I'm practicing
huge gap.
outward
Yeah.
behavior. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a huge gap between our beliefs. We all believe in gender equality and our behavior, not just to
Yeah.
women, but men, because men are a huge part of this equation, right? Men believe in
Hmm.
gender equality. We interviewed lots of men as well. And they said, why women have their rights? Why don't they speak up? And in the
Hmm.
next question, we said, what happens? What do you think about a woman who speaks up at work? And they found it unattractive and said women are showing off and they don't trust
Yeah.
women. So it's
Yes.
both, right? So it's not, I think that the framing should not be who is to blame. The framing should be how should we change?
Yes. Absolutely. Yes. This gap between what we believe and how we actually behave, when I first heard about it, was absolutely revealing to me as well, because it showed, like, even it showed to me all of those ways in which, I do the same thing. Like, my behavior is not at all similar
Yeah.
to my beliefs, and that's true for so many of us. Another thing that I resonated with, I read it in one of your interviews. I think you said power is invested in boys and morality is invested in girls. And this took, I grew up in Lucknow, so I resonated with this a lot, because I know that cultural conditioning of what a good, virtuous woman is like very well. Um, but I also realized that uh, in this case, no matter what side of the spectrum you go on, you lose something. So if you go on that side of rebellion and not following any conventions, you might lose certain relationships, or you might lose your place in society and the way that you're looked at. If you follow these conventions, you might be seen as someone who's good, but you lose your independence, your respect for yourself, your voice, your power. So I wanted to understand what does an empowered, mature, and self-loving way of transforming and also behaving in an empowered way, what does that look like?
Mm. Big question, brilliant question.
Yeah.
I think it looks different for different people. There's no standard answer. I think your question, the earlier question that you asked in terms, is really a question about costs and benefits,
Yes.
right? Because you lose something and you gain something. And we only move when we see that the gain is higher than the loss. So, for
Yes.
example, it's only when I thought that when I was determined, for example, to go off to the US to study as a young woman, I was so clear on that goal. Even though I didn't know how I would do it or what would happen to me, the goal was so clear that nothing could come in
Hmm.
the way. If I had thought about all the problems, the fact that I didn't have enough money, the fact that I didn't know anyone in the US, the fact that I'd never lived away from home even for one night, if I had focused on all that, I would just have been paralyzed. Except
Yes.
you have to take your action and then figure it out. So I would say
Hmm.
that's really important. Uh, and I think at a sort of a very instinctive level is when you start coming alive or feeling alive is the best indicator that you're feeling empowered. I think all the rest is too individualistic, because
Yes.
one person's hell is another person's paradise,
Yes.
right? So women
Yeah.
living at home and looking after children, they may be ecstatically happy. That's
True.
fantastic. Do that.
Yeah.
If you're miserable at work, why are you at work?
Mm.
Right? You have to get clear and make some choices or move in some way. So I think this, not just I have to be happy all the time. I think that's the wrong mantra, but inner sense of contentment and joy and a feeling of aliveness, I think, is the best indicator of feeling empowered or moving in that direction.
Yeah. Yes, that makes so much sense.
So, for example, when I'd be scared to speak up at a meeting. I was at the World Bank for many years,
Mhm.
and I realized I was scared. And so I came up with a strategy, and that strategy worked for me. I said, okay, you have to practice before, you have to make clear decisions. So I said, okay, I'm going to this meeting. It's an important meeting. I'm going to ask a question. And
Hmm.
I'm going to be the first one to ask a question. And so the moment the meeting was over, and this would be, 500 people in a huge hall with all the senior people of the world, I would raise my hand. And sometimes I would be called, and sometimes, do you think I was afraid? Of course I was. But you do it and you keep doing it,
Yeah.
then, you comes a point when it just becomes your normal. And then you move on to another challenge. So I think it's a lifelong journey of growth and challenges. What challenges me is different from your challenge. So I don't think there can be a uniform. For some women, speaking up is not an issue, or speaking up in
Hmm.
the office is not an issue, but speaking up at home to their husbands
Yeah.
is an issue. And for
Yeah.
some, at home, everything is hunky-dory, but they go to the office and they become a mouse, or their mouth closes. So that's where their challenges are. So each one of our challenges is different. But I think I wish I had known that not being able to speak up or feeling afraid to speak up sometimes and not at others was not a personal defect.
Hmm.
It's how I was
Yes.
raised, right? I
Yes.
was raised to be quiet, and I was scolded for speaking up. And my mother used to say, uh, and we laughed even as kids, but that conditioning happens early, used to say, see how I can control my kids with the bat of my eyelashes.
Hmm.
In Hindi, it's
Yeah.
mere bache mere, what's it? I forget the word. Bali
Pala?
pe naachte hain. Huh?
Ah, okay.
Something like that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
used to tease her later, but you have to laugh at these things and then say, okay, there's a serious part to it, and we have to deal with it.
Yeah. Do you think so it has obviously has to do with parenting, but also beyond that, which is the cultural conditioning that we receive and the messages we receive through that. For example, my parents were very, very progressive, but at the same time I grew up in an environment that conditioned me, I think, more than just the parenting itself. So in your work, do you see that, especially when you work with women and how they are raising their children now, do you see that that has changed, and how much of an impact does that actually have?
I think lots of things have changed, and it has huge impact. And it's also important that we turn out to realize uh, that we turn out the way we turn out because of lots of factors.
Yes.
And it's not
Yeah.
just, this is not a blame game for parents or shame, because we're all replicating the cultures in which we grew up. And what the book
Yeah.
is about is that how do we interrupt? How do we interrupt this intergenerational transfer? Because we teach what we've seen, and we try not to teach those things that hurt us. So, for
Yeah.
example, my mother was very strong in financial independence, and she
Hmm.
ingrained into us that all my children, all my girls, the three of us, there are five of us, two brothers and three sisters, and she ingrained it up very early that all my girls will be highly educated, no marriage until you stand on your own 2 feet. So that was never an issue for us. There were other issues, right?
Hmm.
And you're absolutely right that society, because we're all in this interlock, that society has a huge impact on us too. So my mother, in terms of delaying age of marriage for us, had to fight off all her relatives, including her own father. But on this one thing, she was able to take a stand. Lots of other
Hmm.
things she couldn't, but this for her was her non-negotiable. And I think that's what saved all of us, all the women in my particular family. And to this day, we thank her
Hmm.
for that, for teaching us to
Yeah.
stand up on our, to be financially independent.
Yeah. Yes. I also wanted to address the workplace here because we've all been through those programs around women leadership
Yeah,
and programs that are designed to make women into better leaders, and there is a lot of conversation around that at the workplace, but somehow it doesn't seem to work because like you mentioned in your work, it doesn't address the core beliefs. Um,
exactly.
so so what how can the how can we have conversations at work, or what can we do at work that actually makes women leaders out of us in a way that is real and authentic, and it's not just surface level behavior?
I think I mean, for me, it's very simple. You've got to address the cultural issues. You've got to address
Mm.
I hear all the time in, politicians and newspapers, women must support each other. That's
Yeah.
rhetoric, right? This
Yeah.
is sloganeering. Women must be leaders, empower women, empower girls. Great that they're saying it, but how do you
Mm.
translate this into behavior? I think the HR departments I don't have an intimate have changed. But I think if they were really want to have more women in leadership, they need to have these kinds of conversations we're having in Chup circles, which
Mm.
is, why do you behave the way we do? Why do we behave the way we do? And why do men behave the way we do? They do. And how can we change it and have these conversations in a compassionate, non-judgmental way without blame or shame? Because when women see that, oh my God, I I was afraid, I've been rebellious all my life. I think rebellion is a great way to get started and going out. Otherwise, you'll never overcome everything. The weight of everything that's against you will crush you. So, rebellion and anger are great forces to mobilize you and move you out of a system that you feel is oppressive to you. And then, if you're rebellious the whole life, you'll get some satisfaction, but maybe not others. So
Mm.
then you have to see what else needs to shift. Let me give you a concrete example in the case of work at the
Yeah.
workplace. Leadership. Leadership is rhetoric, right? Why don't we look at all the things, all the behaviors that women have been taught and that men have been taught about their expectations of how women behave that prevent women from rising into leadership, which is all these things. Don't give a strong
Mm.
opinion, keep your opinion to yourself. Please others, deference to others, don't
Yeah.
interrupt. All these endless lists of be a follower, listen to
Yeah.
others, don't share your opinion, play it safe. How can you how can you practice these behaviors as a leader? A leader is almost the opposite, right? And our
Yeah.
expectations of a leader is mostly a very masculine form of leadership. So all this
Yeah.
needs to shift. And if it does, I'll give you one more example. This was while I was writing the book. I was invited to some meeting at the World. I think it was organized by the World Bank on human development and potential. And there was a wonderful American woman, a trainer
Mm.
who'd been doing training in various large corporations. And she'd been doing training in negotiation. And she said, she was quite upset. She said, I've just finished a 2-day training for mid management and senior women in management on how to do negotiation. And she said, they sat with their arms crossed the entire time. And I don't think I got anywhere.
Mm.
So the issue is, how would you frame negotiation training for women who are not supposed to exist? So I
Yeah.
challenge HR departments to take that on and to develop leadership training and negotiation, which is a very, very important skill to do it differently.
Yeah. That's wonderful because all your life you are conditioned to behave in one way, and then suddenly at work you're expected to undo the conditioning all of a sudden and behave like this,
Right.
leader, and you get feedback. Oh, you need to speak up more. Oh, you need to be more visible, but no one ever talks to you about what is it that's actually holding you back. Um,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And that goes into most of the training is at the head level,
Yes.
right? We need to get into the body and the emotional level. So I call myself, in the book I talk about feminists. We're all feminists with bad habits.
Yes.
So, I deliberately use the word habit to convey the fact that it's training. These are all learned behaviors, and we can change them. And it's
Hmm.
easier to change them together with other people so that there's support. And then you can both laugh at your mistakes and then go on trying
Yes.
again.
Absolutely. I also, one of the things that I come across in the context of women leaders is that women leaders have very high EQ. But even that EQ is from the perspective of people they are responding to. So it's from the perspective of others, that they can respond to other people's emotions and that they know how other people are feeling. But you mentioned in one of your interviews that women, you often find emotional illiteracy in women, especially when it comes to things like anger.
Yeah.
Uh, so how do we, look at these two things together? That on one hand, women are supposed to have high EQ. On other hand, they're not even aware often of how they are feeling because they're not
Mhm.
allowed to express many of those emotions.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's again unpacking both, right? So men,
Yeah.
when we talk about, we did a lot of interviews with men as well, and we asked men, if you have a problem, would you rather talk to a man or a woman? And 99% said to a woman.
Hmm.
And we said, why? Because women are empathetic and they can listen. We were very good
Hmm.
listeners, most of the time, some of the time. Uh, but when it comes, let me just talk about anger. Good women don't get angry,
Yeah.
period. So it's over right there. Good women don't get angry. So I had to reclaim. So if you can't be angry, what happens to that anger, that life energy? Right? If you just think of anger as passion or injury, it goes underneath and
Yeah.
it comes out in different ways,
Yes.
right? So, so anger in the entire research, even talking to young girls in schools from 11 to 16 years old, there was only one uh, girl who said, "My father allows me to be angry,
Hmm.
and only he can handle my anger." All the others, it was already ironed out of them. And so reclaiming anger as a right and learning how to express that appropriately is as important for women as it is for men. I think male anger goes into violence and force, and female
Hmm.
anger goes underneath, and I think often comes up through depression because women turn all
Yeah.
these emotions internally inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anger is a very important emotion, just like negotiation is a very important skill. And we need to learn to connect and see what is underneath the anger. Underneath the anger is usually some violation. You're feeling violated in some way.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so focusing on that gives us a way of, what is it that we need to reclaim? So if my
Yes.
partner speaks to me rudely and I feel hurt or I feel angry, right? If I just let it go, I simmer. So you
Hmm.
need to you need to learn how to express that you're
Yeah.
hurt or you're angry because of this, and then negotiate a behavior that's appropriate for you. And it's the same thing at work, right? When
Yeah.
men, and it's usually as men or a boss, woman boss or a male boss talks down, we take it.
Hmm.
What if we were assertive? There are usually consequences for that, and that's why women don't speak up.
Yes.
But if six women, young women at work, get together and say, this is not appropriate behavior. We don't want to be treated like this because it violates who we are. It would be different. But each woman is on their own. And so
Hmm.
then if a single woman speaks up, by single I don't mean marital status, but one woman speaks
Yeah.
up, then she can
Yeah.
be squashed or
Yes.
be named
Yeah.
or be labeled the troublemaker.
Yes.
right? And that doesn't help. I know it's changing, but this I'm talking about patterns of
In
behavior
general,
that are
yes.
still very much the same.
So, Deepa, why don't women get together and talk about these things? Why did it take someone like you to come do the research to uncover these things? Why aren't we talking to each other already and having these conversations? What's keeping us from doing that?
You tell me. I think it goes back to non-existence, right? We are trained. I think the cleverest thing in the cultural system, why it has the system of inequality, gender inequality, has stayed intact generation after generation, century after century. I think the cleverest thing is that the culture trains women not to trust each other.
Yes.
And that the loyalty of a woman is to a man. I think that's the cleverest cultural mechanism to keep women in their place. So if a woman is being beaten up or violated, it's good to take the extreme example. Or if in a middle class family, both are working and still the woman has no voice or has no control over her money, she's too afraid to speak up. She's too afraid to talk to other women in the family. Right?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Because we've all been trained, ghar ka mamla ghar pe rakho. Your problems at home, you keep at home, you don't talk about it to
Yeah.
anyone. And the
Yeah.
loyalty.
Absolutely.
Now,
That
where
all the
can
time.
she go? Why would she talk to anyone? And the thing that you have to remember about these early training is this notion of morality, of you're supposed to be good. So a good woman, and we all want to be good in a moral sense, does not violate these things. And if you look at the movies, if you look at our rituals, if you look at, and they're beautiful. When a woman is married and leaves her home, in North India at least, you put the hand
imprint of
thump
the
on the wall,
hand.
imprint, right?
Yeah.
And these
Yeah.
are the scenes where everyone bursts into tears, and it's very emotional that you're leaving home. Now you'll only come back when you're dead. So where does she go? And if she hasn't been able to speak to anyone, of course we all have friends, but not to a point where you can say, oh my God, this is happening. Where do I go? What do I do? Then all the judgment comes up and all the fears of the other women come up, because if one woman rocks a boat, other women have to see what's happening in their families, which is very uncomfortable. So it's much safer, the safer way. And I'm not blaming women to take the safe way. The safer way is not to rock the boat.
Yes.
And so we don't rock the boat. And so there's been
Yeah.
silence. I mean, what I did was pull together the behaviors that we see every day, but nobody had pulled it together, including myself. It gave me new insights on the system.
Yes.
And this really is about systems, the behavioral systems, the cultural systems that keep us locked down despite education and despite increases in income.
Yeah.
So the real question is, what would we do? We already achieved so much, but what would we do as women if we were not afraid? Right?
Yes.
And then immediately, if you are fearless, then you'll think, oh, that's just me. But if you joined hands with other women and together became fearless, you would be a force to reckon with. And that's why I love the work that you're doing in Kool, Kanya.
Yes,
Bringing
thank
women
you.
together.
Yes, that is the whole idea.
Someone has just
Also,
written, don't wash your dirty laundry in public. That's exactly right.
yes, that's one of those
You
things
keep
that
it,
women are told as well. Yes. So I'm just going
keep
to
it
look at
quiet.
some comments here and questions to see if there's something we want to address.
And then I love to talk about the Chup circles, because that was in
Yes.
response to the hundreds of emails and requests I got after the book from women from India, but also from Indian women across the world. And how do we change?
Yes, I would love to talk about that.
Yeah.
So let me just say, Charnita says, why do we compulsively hide our true needs and feelings?
Because
Yeah.
go back to, you're not supposed to exist.
Yes.
If you're not supposed to exist, you're meant to be a ghost. And a
Yes.
ghost doesn't speak, and a ghost doesn't have any needs or feelings. So it's a
Yeah.
deep, deep, I mean, I feel emotional talking about it, but it's a deep, deep training, right? If you don't exist, you cannot have any needs. And so, of course, you suppress your needs. So when you speak up, you feel
Yeah.
guilty. You feel
Yes.
guilty because you feel guilty to just exist. I'd encourage all of you to think about, observe how many times women say sorry compared to men. I went on a hike
Yeah.
the other day here in the US, and at least 10 women who passed me, and there was lots of space for everyone to go, passing me said, I'm sorry.
Hmm.
You know, we're constantly apologetic because we're not
Yes.
supposed to exist.
Yes.
So,
And so there's guilt, there's
right. So
self-blame, there's
we
shame.
hide because we're not supposed to exist. We feel shame when we want something. And I think some
Yeah.
of that is breaking with the younger girls, but it's still there.
Yes.
So I would say if you have needs and you're feeling like hiding, make a list of those needs, pull it out, and then
Hmm.
practice. Take one desire from that and express it. Go after it.
I love that. It's like taking them out and airing them and showing them the
Yeah,
light.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Wonderful. I have another question I'd like to take from Priyadarshini. She says, most of the time, I think it's my mother who puts me down. How do I talk to her?
By coming back to yourself and sharing how you feel when
Hmm.
she does that, not blaming her, but telling her about how you feel and showing her your tears, your hurt, and how it devastates you. I think we are constantly being devastated, but because we are told we shouldn't have any feelings, we automatically
We
hide
don't
them.
show it.
So you
Yeah.
have to express how you feel and be vulnerable and not be ashamed of your feelings and not go into I'm strong. So if you
Yeah.
attack her just from the intellect and you make her wrong, nothing will shift.
Hmm.
Nothing will shift, I can guarantee you. But if you show her the impact of the words, of her words on you, maybe something will shift. And you keep trying, and if it doesn't, you just stop being vulnerable with her. So we all have to do this, or with
Yeah.
anyone else.
Yes. Yes. I hope that answered your question, Priyadarshini. Another question is around how to develop a positive attitude towards criticism.
I would change that question a bit.
Hmm.
I think it depends on who criticizes and whether you asked for feedback. I think the world is too loose with everyone thinks they're entitled to criticize women or give their
Yeah.
opinions to women. I think that has to stop. Every auntie, every uncle is passing comments on girls and women. Why? Who gave them that right? So that's the first thing I would stop. I didn't give you permission walking down the road to tell me I'm fat or thin or skinny or however. I didn't tell my aunts they have permission to criticize me. So I think first that you have to see whether you've given someone permission, especially as an adult, to criticize you or not. Otherwise, if they criticize you, you basically say, look, I'm not interested in this. I didn't ask you for your judgment. Thank you. Please take it back. I'm not accepting it. When I need your opinion, I'll come back to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So stand up for yourself. And the second thing about criticism is we haven't learned how to really give people feedback in a way that's helpful to them. But in a criticism, sometimes, not always, there's a kernel of truth, right? So dig into it, explore it, look at it in every way, and see what is that little kernel of truth in there? Is there any truth in here or not? And it may take you days or weeks. And if you feel finally, once you get beyond your hurt and protectiveness and defensive system that is natural, that comes up to protect you,
Hmm.
but women and men, we have loose tongues. Don't give advice. Don't criticize others unless they've asked you.
Yeah.
Focus on
And don't,
yourself.
and don't accept it unless you've asked for
Right.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for answering those questions, Deepa. Let's talk a little bit about Chup circles because I also want to be
Okay.
mindful of your time.
Okay.
Tell me why you started them and what actually happens. How do we change?
Right.
How do we transform?
So there are two aspects to my life that came together in these Chup circles. One is the intellectual, which is I love doing the research and trying to figure out what's happening,
Yeah.
the conceptual work. And then the second is the practical. What do we do with this? So partially the work is awareness raising, and that's the book. But secondly, as we talked about, is change is difficult because these are deep habits, and
Yeah.
also because there's an overlay of morality, the goodness, right? We want to hide how
Yeah.
we feel, we want to hide our needs, etc., etc. So Chup circles took about a year, and it's a process. It's an experiential process which takes the 7 habits, and it's women and men, women separately, men separately. We're still developing the curriculum for men. Is for women to come together in compassionate, non-judgmental. Starts with reading. It's a fun, it's experiential.
I
It
think it's
has a
true.
lot of games and activities that you can do to explore, for example, your relationship with your body. Anything
Hmm.
that's bothering you can come out. So it's not therapy. It's more learning some tools to deal with criticism, to deal with comments, to deal with how do you talk at work, or how do you talk to your partner, or to your boyfriend, or to your girlfriend, or to friends, so that you feel respected and
Hmm.
heard. It has the starting assumption is that there's nothing wrong with you. You're well already. And how
Hmm.
can you unlearn these simple behaviors that cause so much unhappiness? So it's very
Yeah.
behavioral. It's focused on behavioral change in the company of other women. I think it's a 20-hour program, and we've trained facilitators who can then work with you. But it's really important to complete the sessions and not drop out because things get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So,
So we're doing this workshop starting from the
yeah.
4th of July. Rita, you asked how one can register for these Chup circles. So they used to be offline, right? But we're doing it online now because it is the need of the hour to move and to shift these spaces online as well. Once this live is over, I will post, there will be a post on Kool Kanya which tells you all about where you can register. So if for anyone who's watching this and is interested in registering, please do that. I also just wanted to say that if you register within the next 48 hours, there is a discount. It's nominally priced, but there's still a discount because we want you to register, and I'm going to be there as well. Um, Okay, I think we've covered many things. I see that there are many more questions, but we have to be mindful of Deepa's time. But I think the if you register for the workshop and you participate, we can collectively answer all of these questions. Pooja, who's been specially trained by Deepa herself, will be facilitating that, so we can discover the tools like Deepa mentioned to and find the answers collectively as well.
Wonderful.
So yes. Yes. Deepak, thank you so much. This
My
was,
pleasure.
I felt like, I felt like tiny bits of revelations happening every time you were speaking and even answering other people's questions. Um, it's been absolutely an honor to have you and to have you speak to us. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you everyone for joining. And I look forward to seeing you in the workshop as well.
Thank you, Shagun, for all the work in Kool Kanya. I think it's amazing to see women getting together and supporting each other. And for you, the platform that you've created is wonderful. So good luck.
Thank you so much, Deepa. Thank
Take care.
you. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.